Welcome, everybody. I appreciate everyone taking the time out of your day to spend some time with Chris and I. Today, we're going to talk about microsegmentation, zero trust, containing threats, all that fun stuff. Going to be lots to cover here. So, without further ado, we'll jump right into it. Uh, I'll uh, I'll go first, I guess, Chris, and then I'll pass it over to you. I'm
Sure.
Corey, Vice President of Security Services at RedHelm. Run our DFIR, Digital Forensics Incident Response Team, our security engineering, and our managed detection and response team. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chris.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris Boehm. I am the field CTO for Zero Networks, one of two, and I work across every vertical when it comes to the Zero Networks security portfolio, whether it comes to sales, HR, marketing, engineering efforts, including go-to-market strategies, and working with customers just like yourself on this call. So I'm a little of a what do you call that? A tool in a toolbox. Like I have to do a little everything. So.
I certainly understand that for sure. All right, so we're here to talk about some microsegmentation. We should probably start with what is microsegmentation for those that, are a bit newer to this. Microsegmentation, from my perspective, is, digging in. So digging in deeper than what traditional networking has allowed for. So a really good example or a simple example of this is you might build out a VLAN, traditional networking wise, and now you have a subnet at 10.0.0.0/24. Everything on that network can talk to everything on that network because it's on the same network. Where microsegmentation comes in or comes to the table is those assets, we can now control how each individual asset talks. And it's also not bound by, say, a VLAN to VLAN communication layer or something along those lines. The other big key component of this is it can gain you visibility inside of those networks, right? So what I just described, you can control the traffic. You can also see the traffic, which is a huge component of that. And then, you can detect things like threat actors in your environment. They're going to do wonky things. That's a technical term, by the way. Probably going to use a whole bunch of technical terms. But the big key component here, one of the key reasons that RedHelm started going down the path for microsegmentation is because of our incident response team, candidly. We're seeing an ever increase in ransomware and malware attacks, and one of the ways that they do that is through lateral movement. Lateral movement, the key component is visibility and being able to enforce, what you have there around what assets should be doing, not what they are doing or what they have available or what the possibilities are for network um, traffic. So, with that being said, Chris, before we go any deeper, I wanted to kind of get your take on this. And when you're talking to organizations today, how do they typically describe what they have for visibility or what's happening in their network? How are they seeing it, or is it a lack of visibility? Kind of, what are you seeing whenever you have those conversations?
So it's partly due to how technology has evolved over the years, and it makes sense after you think about it. You take a step back. A lot of the time, when it comes to a business operation, companies feel pretty confident and relatively um, positive, and like I would say, the majority of them say, hey, "I know what is coming in and out of my business." Now that conversation is because they have firewalls, they've used the ISPs, they have certain configuration in place, they have controls, they have additional security, the SIM logs, the list goes on and on, right? So they're like, I know what's going in and out of my business. Now, when it gets to the cloud workloads, I think I know what's going on, except some of the shadow cloud workloads and some AI capabilities. And that's where they start blurring. And cloud is really where introduction started breaking down the barriers that we're used to. This is not new. Most people have been facing this for quite some time. So when it started, they're like, well, we can solve this. We can connect everything together. That's what everyone started doing. They can segment it into buckets, or they can start connecting everything together. And then they realized, well, wait a minute, I don't really know what's going on if something was happening across my internal networks. And that's where people are usually blind. I would say 60 to 70% of companies can't tell me what all communication is going on within their internal networks and internal VLANs and communications. Even if there's bridges and other things being secure, you still usually have that hole open to allow communication. So we were using an example, as Corey just mentioned. Here's a real world customer example, and this is not like they did anything bad. They assumed everything would work appropriately. So I won't tell you the department, but it was a police department I was talking to, and they, as you may or may not be aware, officers wear body cams. Well, those body cams connect to, surprise, surprise, their car. Their car then sends the information to the data center that they're connected to, and that's all secure and monitorized. Well, the thing they didn't anticipate was there was a vulnerability through the body cam that allowed them to access their car, the car that had access to, shocker, the data center where it had all the information, and then it had other information connected to it. So in that scenario, it didn't look malicious. They were actually using the appropriate thread to allow communication to occur. So from attackers, they just went through a normal channel. But from an internal operation, you're like, well, this looks normal. Like the camera is supposed to communicate through this funnel. So that's where people start finding blind spots, I would say. And that's where lateral movement in that one scenario would have challenged the abnormal. It would have said, hey, this user typically talks like that body cam to the car. But why is the body cam trying to talk? I mean, the car talking to something it's not used to talking to, or vice versa. So that's where lateral movement and microsegmentation should have been limited. And instead, it just let the attacker spread, which is terrifying to think about. So.
Absolutely. That's a really good example. A really fun example too, to be
Yeah,
honest.
it's a real one too. That's
Yeah.
the sad part.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. 100%. So, well, you brought up lateral movement. I brought up lateral movement. So, lateral movement would be, kind of as Chris has described in his example, it would be one asset talking to another one at the most core fundamental level, right? In a way that you don't want it to, you don't expect it to, or would be against what you would want it to have happen, right? So, that's really what lateral movement is. Lateral movement could be workstation to workstation. It could be workstation to server. It could be workstation to cloud. It could be cloud to workstation. It could be any direction. That's really what lateral movement is going to be. And then there's also terms that they throw out there like north and south versus east and west. So north and south would be traditionally what is going through a firewall. So from inside your network, out of your network. So a lot of businesses have some level of visibility because they have a firewall in between those. And then it would also be outbound or external inbound. You could call it ingress, egress, etc. Many different ways you could describe that or terms for it. But that would be traditional north and south. And again, there's really good solutions in that space for the most part to gain you a lot of visibility. But what happens is once that traffic comes in, that's where you lose visibility of it. Once it talks to a machine, let's say it is malicious, it overtakes a machine. Now that machine starts to move around internally. That's where that lack of visibility that Chris was just talking about exists as well, right? Going back to the camera on the police officer's body, physically, you could literally have somebody in his physical area with a sniffer, sniffing his wireless signals and then attempting to do something. Now that's a pretty targeted attack or what have you. But it's still a possibility. They overtake that. Now all of a sudden they have access to the car. Now all of a sudden, as Chris described, they have access to the data center. And so like now that whole kind of arena, that's where you're not going to have that visibility. I start to overtake one asset. I phish a user, let's say, is a really easy example of this. After I phish them, you have no visibility into what's happening on how they're moving. And that movement is called east to west movement. So that's really where that lateral movement problem begins, is on the inside of your network. Inside of your network, by the way, doesn't have to be workstation to workstation. It could be the way that networks are designed and built today. It could literally be a cloud asset ported back through a private fiber connection to your data center. It could literally be a cloud asset back to a workstation. That is technically east to west. Sometimes that's going through a firewall. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not. So that's where that lateral movement really becomes quite key to most businesses, and why that visibility ends up being so important. So one last thing I'll say here in this space, it's the same thing. I might even say this a couple times, is one lesson I've learned through IR, because we have visibility and we can answer this question, is should a workstation ever talk to another workstation? And the answer is in 99% of the cases, no. So once you gain this visibility, you can start to answer questions like, do my workstations talk to workstations? And then you'll be able to say no. And then now that you know that, where you have evidence-based, data-driven evidence of that, now you can make decisions on it. So from your perspective, Chris, how common is it that organizations don't actually know what's happening inside of their network? Are you seeing commonly people do or commonly people don't? We'll start there.
I'll say commonly they don't. Just like I mentioned, you're assuming you have those walls in place. A lot of companies feel like they've locked it down. So why is it a concern? And I think it's now gaining more concern because of modern technology. But previously, people felt like it's a nice to have or it's too painful to deal with. So they just assume I'm going to build those walls up and make it harder for people to get in. I've had that conversation with large organizations like, oh, it's impossible for Corey not to get in this laptop. Like after of course he logs in, like, but no one but Corey can log into this laptop. I'm like, well, that's great, but what if Corey logged in as not Corey? Like that's the scenario for you. And how do you prove it's not Corey? So it starts getting to that different philosophy conversation, and then they're like, well, you got a point there. So yeah, I mean, if Corey logged in and it wasn't Corey, then yeah, we're screwed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it turns into a different conversation when it comes to lateral movement.
That makes perfect sense. Do you have any examples or scenarios that you've been through where maybe you were deploying, we're just going to pick on your product here, Zero
Yeah.
Networks, and the customer had no idea about, lateral movement that was happening until your platform was dropped and it, exposed it.
Yeah, in order for us to be utilized, we do it from a multi-network tier layer. So we are on every machine in your environment. In scenarios OT, it's on the switch firewall layer. But for the most part, we're looking at local asset traffic. So we're monitoring your user, your operating system, and applications. So we see those three layers and then where they're communicating to. That's how we bridge out and provide a map of how your business is working, and then we harden for protection purposes, and that's where we do microsegmentation. But to kind of answer your question, we just had a customer recently, and obviously I won't share names, but one of the things they highlight on is usually it's a machine they were unaware of. And in most common scenarios, it's an application or it's a domain controller. And they see a lot of extra traffic that's happening internally that they're like, well, why is everything communicating to this? And they're seeing workstations, they're seeing other applications. And it's because it was just some legacy solution that was using credentials that was a little open and just communicating on a regular basis. And they're like, what if that was malicious? Like we would never knew that was happening, but all of it was communicating back and forth to the domain controller. And that's a huge red flag. If they took over the domain controller and locked us all down, then they would have that bad ransomware scenario, right? So it is not uncommon. I wish it was more uncommon, but it's not uncommon for one of our customers to be surprised on some network communication or activities, whether that's an application or a user or even just machine to machine. So it's always fascinating to see, and it's an unfortunate side effect or fortunate because we provide that visibility and allow you to know, hey, this is the recommended policies for your business to keep working as it is today. So
That makes perfect sense.
yeah.
So in that same light, do you have one story that you would be comfortable sharing maybe around what was the most surprising thing one of your customers had saw whenever they turned this on?
Um, the most, yeah, I'd say the most surprising one was an application that was just fully communicating to everything in their environment for the most part, all their key critical servers, and the ports were just fully open. So if someone got that box, they got all boxes, and that was a big fear for them. Is well, we had no idea it was that open. It was just it was probably an innocent thing. A developer worked with their IT team and said, "I need access in order for this to work." And our tool found that very quickly because we noticed, hey, this machine needs to talk through these protocols to this application, and it's required in order for if your web business wants to keep running. I know, like this is where the human element is still very important when it comes to business. Our tools are very good at finding what you're doing and then hardening. But if you have something bad in place, or you have something that's bad, poor hygiene in place, we're going to call it out because we want to keep your business running. We don't want to break your applications. So that's the most common scenario. I would say there is the scenario we've seen, unfortunately, someone laterally moving. That does happen. Or something is in your space that's communicating out, like a C2 command that's reaching out to another machine, and then to do a relay through a proxy. Like we have seen that communication. I'm not saying that's always common, but we would catch that as well because we'd say we see this relaying information, and here's a policy in place we'd recommend for you to have. So that has happened as well, and that's probably the more scary one because they're kind of trying to hide their tracks within your own company. But
100%. 100%. Well, with that, it's time for our first poll. Our first poll is how much visibility do you have into your oh my gosh, I cannot talk today. How much visibility do you have into how systems communicate inside of your network today? So that'll pop up there. If you do not mind popping in a question. Popping in a question. My gosh,
answer.
Chris. I don't know
It's
what's
okay.
happening with me
It's like a
today.
Monday, right? So
I think it is a Monday. So pop in an answer, not a question. And then we'll keep moving here. All right. So what microsegmentation actually does here, right? So with microsegmentation solutions, what you want to be able to do is have visibility and enforcement capabilities around the device, port, application, user level control, all of that fun stuff. So whenever you see that, just kind of quick step back on that, this is something that's going to gain you visibility into how your users are interacting with different devices. Where are they? Some businesses, you might have one user per one device. Perfect. Some businesses, you have users who are moving around. Think healthcare. Healthcare is typically a great place to think of this. You have somebody going from room to room to room to room, and there's one machine in each room that each user is logging into. Things of that nature, right? So that's typically what you'll see there. And so now you'll be able to get visibility to where your users are actually logging in, what devices are they using. And then from there, you can dig into how are they communicating on the network at a port level? What ports are they using? What is common there? And then what processes are associated to that? All of that fun stuff. So then from there, that's kind of the first piece is gaining that visibility. And then from there, you'd want to understand your network, like Chris he kind of mentioned this a little bit, kind of touched right in on it. They do this very differently. There's a lot of AI and machine learning built into Zero, so it's a lot more automagic there in that sense. There's obviously finite control that you can enact as well. It's not just automagic. It's kind of a nice combination of both. So I say that because, it'll help discover, help baseline and all that fun stuff. But then from there, it's really digging into policy and enforcing it specific to your environment. So with that being said, I usually get a question that I like to be upfront about, which is, hey, does this replace network segmentation? And my answer is always the same. I'm a huge security and layers type person. It's not that one will not solve the problem of the other, but in my opinion, you should always layer these on top of each other. Because if, for example, you don't have microsegmentation in place, there are many ways to bypass traditional networking style segmentation. Plenty. And that will vary by the network gear that you have in place and different vulnerabilities and all that fun stuff. But think about that. You have that in place, and then you layer this on top of that. Now the threat actor has to actually bypass two. Or let's say you've struggled in the past putting network segmentation in place, or you're on a flat network and you haven't been able to do it. This can get you to segregation and microsegmentation. And then what you can do, all the hard work's done for you, the visibility, the enforcement, you can just come back through and start tacking on your network segmentation after that. Like you can use your pre-existing roles for that. And then the next piece is this typical allow list approach. Whenever we say that, what we mean is where you want to drive this to is to a place where the only traffic happening is the stuff that you explicitly allow and everything else is denied. That is kind of the end state that you want to get to. Not every business has the appetite for that, but that is kind of the end state that you want to drive towards. And then that will get you to a place where whenever threat actors, phish a user, and then typically the first stage of compromise, like post-compromise, is going to be, oh, what can I see around me? They're going to do recon immediately, right? And that is going to set off your alarms for lateral movement in most instances. Not always. There's always going to be caveats to everything. But that's typically what that's going to look like there. So as I've described a whole bunch of things, Chris, you probably hear a lot of complexity. I kind of touched on it a little bit. Talk to me about why your platform is much easier to implement than, say, a different microsegmentation platform, if you don't mind.
I mean, yeah, you kind of hit it on it already. So there's a few key aspects that customers focus on zero networks versus our competition. One of them is we don't require an agent. We actually can be completely agentless. So that is a very appealing approach from speed to scale and deployment. We do have an agent to be clear, but it's not required. Most customers, I would say a majority of them, like the agentless approach. Number two is we do a full behavioral statistic learning of each asset. And how we do that is when we don't have an agent, you have this segment server. It does line of sight and communication and then injects a process. So there's a debate on agent versus agentless there. But there is a process that's learning every machine. So it does tracking, understanding the application layer, what your users are doing, and it builds that into our SaaS platform and says, hey, I know what this machine is talking to, with what application, with what users, human, unprivileged, the list goes on and on. From there, it builds out a policy library for you. And the thing is, a business typically is not the same every day. So we usually recommend a 30-day learning. You could do 60, 90, indefinite, doesn't really matter. But we recommend a 30-day learning just to get a baseline of your machines. And it says, here's all the policies we learned for you. Those two big things, the agentless and the automation, is a big factor why people pick zero networks. Now, there is other things that make us unique. We are one of the few, actually, I think maybe one or two, that is an identity first network segmentation, where most are truly, they start on networking and they may tack on identity, but we are an identity first segmentation. And what I mean by that is we do have a patent in place that allows us to do multi-factor authentication elevation when necessary. So, as an example I gave earlier, if Corey tried to get onto that database or machine, and he does have the rights, he's the domain admin, but he's going to be blocked by default because we're going to say, hey, you don't typically talk workstation to workstation. But you know what? You're trying to remote in and help somebody, or who knows what, and you're trying to gain access to this. We would challenge them, challenge Corey, say, can you just prove you are Corey? And we can open up that port for you because all the hardening is done on the local asset, on the local firewall, and we don't do any manipulation. We don't have our own firewall in place. We don't do anything. So there's multiple levels of why people pick zero networks, but the patent of multi-factor authentication to keep businesses going and not creating that friction, because friction is what kills microsegmentation right there. If you want to have a great microsegmentation journey and all of a sudden say, why are we doing this? You start creating friction. So we as a business learn, provide the policies all for you. So you don't have to ask every application developer something that's been there for 20 years. You have no idea who built it, owned it, does what. We learn all that for you and say, hey, here's what your business is doing right now. You should go in and approve it. You can have it auto approved, but you probably should look at it and verify. And then you can actually even do a simulation. Like if I block it today and I do segmentation, what would stop flowing? And then in the event that I, as a person that uses this business, I need to access this, like that developer or Corey or whoever, I need to have access. As long as I can prove who I say I am, you should gain access to it. And that prevents an attacker from abusing your existing business. So if somebody did log in as Corey and they normally talk to their file share, well, that file share, he probably does have access to. It's just normal communication. But if you try jumping to the file share and somewhere else with Corey's credentials, they've been like, what the heck, Corey, are you doing? Can you prove that you really are Corey? And then we stop it right there. So the spread is done. That's an example right there. I would say that's what makes it a big difference. It's just the business friction and keeping your business up and running is the main goal here from when it comes to microsegmentation.
Yep, absolutely. Two things on that, Chris. One, never give me domain admin. I will wreak havoc. Two, you sort of touched on this, but it is actually one of the features I really like about your platform, and I think with your example, it in my opinion, we need to expound on that a little bit more. Talk to me about temporary roles. You guys have a pretty unique aspect with that capability, in my opinion. Why are
Yeah.
those important? When would you use them, and what does that mean? Because you just kind of described one just now.
I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios that are being utilized. Here's one that I just had a conversation with last week. A customer utilizes our technology to focus on how can they do their business securely. That's actually a scenario that customers really enjoy. So, for example, they're managing the infrastructure for this customer. That's what they do as a business. They go out there and maintain and update their infrastructure, but they have to hire contractors to go out there and gain access to this critical infrastructure while they're maintaining it. This is manufacturing plants, just to be clear. So they're like, well, do I just give everyone like God mode? Like, what do I do here? Because I wanted to be contained and isolated, but I don't want it to be so overprivileged. Like, how do I do this with microsegmentation in place? So they're using us to be first off, they're microsegmented, and then they hire the contractors. The contractors have the permissions, they have the credentials handed to them, and so you go on site. This is your credentials, and then you elevate it. So even if those, for some reason, those credentials got compromised, they have to prove it with their phone and the multi-factor authentication that their business has in place that they are really who they say they are, and they're denied by default on everything. So, and they use this for access into their main machines that are talking to the OT devices in this manufacturing firm. So this is just an example where that is utilized. There's so many different capabilities. A lot of time it is third-party contractor communication access or just doing your job as a business. I need to elevate privileges temporarily for me to get access and do something. You're still segmented, you're hardened, but you allow communication across your business when necessary.
Absolutely. And you also tossed in your last example as well, the MFA portion. You
Yes.
guys can also add in the temporary role plus MFA for the temporary role. So if you want to be extra secure, I mean, I love that. So I just had to point that out because that is a feature that is fantastic and well thought
I
out.
love it too. Yeah, it's really cool.
So, all right, we'll jump into the next stuff, the next section. So, a little bit on this side of the fence is well, actually, I jumped the gun here a little bit, but you touched on this before we move into identity and AI and microseg on that side of the fence. Let's talk a little bit more on one area, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Why is it hard to do microsegmentation? So, like in my experience, I'm going to throw some challenges at you here. Every environment's unique. They're different, and like you could have a domain controller and 7 devices in 3 environments, and they're all doing different stuff because they have one's an in-house developer, one's not.
Right.
We have business context, right? It's not just knowledge of what assets are talking to what assets, but like Sherry and account. I always pick on accounting, Chris. So you're going to hear me pick on accounting. So you have Sherry in accounting. She's talking to a SQL server. Well, from a
Yep.
security team's perspective, they don't know Sherry. Should Sherry talk to the SQL server? Is that part of her job or not? So there's a business context component of that. You risk breaking business applications, which could bring a business down, right? And then it can be quite time consuming. And I know we touched on the time consuming part already, so I feel like we've kind of checked that one off the list, so to speak. But talk to me a little bit more about, you're seeing unique environments, you have business context that you have to overcome, and you have the risk of breaking production, right? So kind of back to some of the points that you just made. Talk to me a little bit more about that and how you guys have overcome that.
Yeah. So obviously there's the scope of I don't know. And this is very common. I just talked to here's a great real world example. There's a bank that's acquiring another bank. They're like, we have a lot of technical debt. We have no idea who owns it. We laid off 80% of that company already. And we have a 1 year migration. And we don't know what all everything's working. So they the drilling they got in, the biggest value, not the microsegmentation part, interestingly enough, the biggest value they got in is, hey, we learn everything, we tell you how their whole business is flowing, and then we segment, right? They're like, wait a minute, so you'll tell me what everything is doing with this company we just bought, and then we can migrate over and have it hardened at the same time. I'm like, exactly, that's what I'm talking about. So that's a scenario right there. So we truly don't need to know anything about you. and we learn everything about you and then segment you. So that's the hard part a lot of businesses run into is they just don't know. Number two is things change at a company. Unfortunately, a lot of companies will go in and say, hey, we are implementing our own segmentation. We're building out policies. We're doing everything on the firewall layer. We have VLANs configurations. We have Hyper-Vs. Like we have it all split up and done appropriately. Network security groups in the cloud. We contain it on everything there. Well, the thing is, things change. Your application expands. Now you want to have AI components to it. You want to talk to this other thing over here. So all of a sudden, most businesses are like, well, wait a minute, I can't do anything. I have to do policy control and change and put in place. I'm talking bigger sizes typically. Um, that's a big factor when it comes to implementing microsegmentation. So it puts the brakes on how much of the environment I want to actually microsegment because it makes it too much business friction. Um, that is something that we had to solve. We had to make sure that you always know, evolve, and we even detect, hey, this is a change that your product's trying to do or detect it, and we can provide it automatically based on whatever rules in place, and it goes into your change control, for example. Um, there is I mean, that's the two big things I would say is usually the factor when it comes to microsegmentation and the friction around it is just not knowing, and it's constantly changing. Every business is changing. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's been our experience as well as you there with microsegmentation, there is a fundamental change in workflow that you typically are going to transform as you go throughout it, right? So like you get to an allow list approach, which is we only allow the traffic we allow, and you go to add a new domain controller, and that domain controller is denied access, right? And then there's
yeah,
the oh crap, and you got to remember, oh, we're microsegmented. We got to go through the proper and the other thing that can do is it can some businesses what we've seen is they'll feel like that's a roadblock to them. Is like, oh well, I have to do this first. Well, keep in mind that's how we keep you secure as well, right? If a threat actor can come in and do these things, that's a really big problem, and that's what we're trying to stop through doing all of this. So we talked quite a bit about identity and AI microsegmentation with your platform. Do you feel like we've missed anything, Chris, in the identity space that we haven't talked about so far?
I mean the main thing is when you think of identity, you commonly think of a domain controller, domain admin, I should say, and a that's usually what people think of. Like, hey, if that was taken advantage of, then they could spread. The thing that is not always highlighted here, and this is what we do as well, is the non-human service accounts. Like, are they privileged and are they contained? And this is becoming a bigger and bigger factor because of AI driven and machine learning and scope. So, as an example, let's just say your dev team's like, hey, I'm just going to use this code. I run this application and it uses a service account with an API token or whatever, and it's spreading across and gaining access and everything. We're assuming they're doing it securely. And that's the assumption, right? Well, what if it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do? What if the AI was spreading and accessing customer data by accident, which is another database next door, or whatever? You just don't know. You're assuming a lot of these AI tools now. You just assume you're like, wow, that's awesome. That's the right data I want to see. You have no idea where it came from. It kind of gave you a summary, but you're like, that's 285 sources. It did it in 10 seconds, and that's awesome. Well, that's exactly what we would have highlighted is saying, hey, this asset and this service account is communicating to everything here. And then we can harden it to say it should never spread past that. So we would provide a visibility and control of privilege accounts and service accounts across your environment. That's the main value that I would say from an identity segmentation. You run into friction. Now, the other part is unless you had an email assigned to it, which most don't, you can't really MFA with those as well. So it's already hardened, and you have to do a policy change manually for that. But that's the scenario I'd say that could create some friction if you use a service account. But it just it just depends on the business and how you do it. Usually, companies know in that kind of scenario. Usually, but it's when they don't know and what it's doing. That's what freaks people out. As an example, just to throw it out there right there, I'm a Spotify user. I don't know if everyone knows this, but Gemini uses, Spotify uses Gemini's LLM with Google Cloud. So it's communicating without me knowing for recommendations of my music portfolio to the cloud platform. And you're like, oh, I had no idea. It could do the exact same thing with other applications within your company because enterprise search tools and other things are popping up and they're very popular right now. Where is it getting its data? Do you know? So.
Absolutely. In the service space, my example is always the Veeam. Whenever you think about your backups, right? Because in IR, I can't say how many times we've seen threat actors go right, and Veeam isn't the problem in this space, by the way. I do not mean to call them out and say they're the problem because that's not the case. It's
Yeah.
any backup software. I just Veeam is the one that I'm more intricately familiar with personally. So, like the Veeam server has a Veeam account. The Veeam server should always log in with a login type of service account, and it should always log into the devices correlated to the backups. But what if your domain controller logged into a device using the Veeam account? That's problematic, right? Like, so
Yep.
even
Yep.
with your AI example, absolutely agree. And then you start to look up across your network and think about what are the other identities that are there, to your point, the kind of the hidden ones, the service accounts that nobody thinks about. So yeah, that was excellent. I fully agree with that. We touched on why it's hard already. I guess we can pop next here because we went through that. So let's talk about how we approach it. Baseline alert enforcement. So, kind of to what Chris said earlier, the way that we typically go through this process is crawl, walk, run. And what I mean by that is there's going to be, let's get visibility to how your network is functioning today. Then from there, we start to layer in alerts. So typically what we'll do is let's gain visibility. Then there are going to be places, obviously, where we can say, oh, there's absolutely nothing on this, and we absolutely can go straight to enforcement. Absolutely no problem. Then you're going to have kind of like a shaky ground in the middle where, well, I'm not sure. It doesn't sound right. It really shouldn't happen, but we don't know. Because, remember, you're baselining. We could be 10 days in. So then in those kind of shaky scenarios, instead of enforcing, if you're concerned about the business being, blocked or stopped or something along those lines, put in an alert. Then we can have a good idea of how often that thing may have blocked that particular thing. And then from there, you would migrate that over to an enforcement. And then you're going to be left with some point with like, you're going to keep iterating on this and iterating on this and iterating on this until you get to the place from space where you want to be, which is like basically you're going to have certain scenarios where you might call out and have alerts like, I want to be alerted if this traffic happens. We would encourage you to move that to more temporary style rules, to be completely candid, because Zero has that capability. But not everybody wants to go that route. It might be like a machine driven thing where they're like, well, we can't really say when it's going to happen. So we want to be alerted and made aware that it is happening. That's a great way to do that. It also limits your disruption capability or likelihood as you go throughout that. So you gain visibility, slowly march into, and I mean slowly, like I'm not talking 2 years slowly. I'm talking weeks slowly. Like this isn't like, several year long or anything along that. You start marching towards enforcement and keep iterating on that. And you basically, the more you do that, the more it focuses in on minimizing your likelihood or possibility of disruption or, all that fun stuff. And then as we said earlier, your environment's always going to change. So there's always going to be a continuous refinement to this process. It's continuously looking at it. And then also a piece that we see commonly missed is scrutinization of your existing allow rules, right? You should be periodically going through and looking at what am I allowing? Is that device still even on my network? Is there traffic even happening on that thing? Just because it is allowed doesn't mean it should always be allowed either. So, with that being said, as we talk about that phased approach, Chris, from your opinion, like in your perspective, from your perspective, in your opinion, how does automation really speed up what I just described? Like, you know, I know from my experience, we've seen traditional tools literally take 6 months, years, like to roll out microsegmentation. From your perspective, how has automation really sped that up?
I mean, at least from the conversations we hear with customers, I've worked with quite a few customers that have been on a like they would say they're in a mature state of segmentation. And then you ask them, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? Some
Mhm.
people find their critical assets are contained and they're considered that secure. And that's a mature level of microsegmentation. Um, I would personally disagree. I would hope the whole company is in the classification of being segmented would mean I'm a mature micro-segmented vendor or a customer. The problem is most of these customers, they have been on a multi-year journey. So as I mentioned, we do 30, 60, 90 days for baselining and we learn what your company does because obviously your company may shift over 30 days where you run something once a month or whatever, right? Um, or once a quarter. But the main thing is we've noticed customers that have had a challenge, and it doesn't matter the size and scale. Like it could be a company of, I have a 50 to 100 workstations to I have 50 to a couple 100,000 workstations or servers or whatever. It's constantly changing. They lack it. It's not the highest priority. They're trying to hit their compliance and regulations purposes, and that's what kind of focuses them to hit it. But when you have the learning model that provides everything for you in a quick fashion, it's just a game changer. We worked with a relatively well-sized bank, one of the top banks in the United States, and they were. This is their feedback that like we worked on segmentation for years. They implemented our solution for learning because it took them. They wanted to do 60 days themselves. So that's 2 months. You can say 2 months of getting the rollout and getting everything going. Our deployment takes an hour at most. I remember it's agentless. It just does everything for you. So the learning really is the biggest factor. And then they were hesitant, just like you stated, like do gradual rollout and containment and isolation. Um, but after one of their branches did the full deployment in 6 months, full micro-segmentation deployment in 6 months, the other ones just jumped on board really quickly. They're like, well, if it's that easy to have full micro-segmentation with privilege access when necessary, that's a very different conversation. So they just started jumping on this very quickly. And now I would say a good chunk of multiple of their branches are now using zero networks fully segmented in their environments while meeting their compliance and regulations and saying, we have confidence if something did happen to my business, we're not going down as a business. We're not going to stop transactions. We're not going to hurt our communications compared to before. 30% of our business, we felt confident in it. Now we can say we're 100% confident across most our business. That's a very different conversation when you talk to investors or board of directors or leadership. So,
Absolutely agree. So is there any decision making, uh, automated versus human led, that you think you are there situations in which you feel that a human still needs to be involved, or do you feel that it is automated well enough at this point in time that you could probably just let the baselining happen and call it a day, throw it into enforcement and move on?
so the baseline itself, like if you just hit segment today, it's Brooklyn privilege ports, just so you know. So
Yep.
that's RDP, SSH, WinRM, like well, to a degree, not fully yeah, WinRM, but RPC is a different one. That's a different piece. You can't block that. So the main thing is we block privilege lateral movement right off the bat without needing a baseline because we know most of the time you need to have privilege escalation anyways. So that's the baseline. From there, I would say then you need to expand a little bit more. So if you wanted to be able to know your application, what they're doing, so I would definitely encourage more so you know what your company's doing. So that's why the learning is needed. Um, but the confidence score is pretty high. There is the aspect of can you go faster than the learning aspects? And yes, we still let you, by the way, take over. It's just like our CEO, he's a pilot. So he's like, it's just like the autopilot in a plane versus you driving the plane. You could still let the plane fly and do what you need to do, but at the same time, you could take over and steer if you want to. So you don't have to 100% depend on our learnings. If you know as a business, this developer needs to have access in this database and this is a communication flow, you just manually add the policy and it pushes it down to local assets automatically. So I would say there is always that human element as part of the equation because your business sometimes need to move faster or you know where things are going. But that's why the automation is to get you 99% there or 95% there, or however you want to look at it.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So that brings us to our second poll. What's the biggest barrier preventing you from improving internal segmentation today? I'm going to say it right this time. Go ahead and pop your answer into that poll if you do not mind. All right, so real world impact. What are we looking at here? Business outcomes. How does this actually work and function in the real world? Are we reducing surface attack surface. What are we doing here? So from my perspective, we've had, just from IR, we've dropped microsegmentation platforms during an IR to gain us visibility into an infrastructure, who's talking to what. A lot of times we'll have IOC indicators of compromise. I know, acronym nightmare over here. We'll have indicators of compromise that, hey, they're using SMB and RPC. So we want to kill SMB. We want to do things like that. So yeah, there's absolute reduction of surface attack surface here. You're slowing or stopping lateral movement. A really big one for lateral movement, as I said earlier, is workstation to workstation traffic. Yes, you could use some patch sharing port for Windows, but we always recommend to disable that. We've actually had IRs where threat actors use that port as their persistence port to try and hide or obfuscate what they do. So if you kill that and you start disabling all the built-in, broadcast protocols, there's zero reason that workstations should be reaching out to workstations. And broadcast protocols typically don't break anything if you disable them, because it's like LLMNR and multicast DNS. Well, if multicast DNS is being used in your environment, that's a problem because DNS is broken, right? Like, you should be talking to your DNS server or talking to DNS to get your DNS, not necessarily your neighbors. And so I bring all that up because, you do that, and that is a massive surface risk that you've just reduced if workstations are not allowed to talk to workstations. And then a workstation starts to talk to another workstation, you're immediately, scrutinizing that activity. Like, what's happening here? Is this machine compromised? Did somebody do something they shouldn't do? Things like that. With these solutions deployed, you're also going to have faster containment. So even if you don't get to the golden end goal of, hey, I want to be able to fully segment my environment. Maybe you're still walking through that process. Well, during, a bad situation, you're talking about just adding policy. You're not deploying something. You're not, a lot of times during IR, it's the deployment of solutions that is time consuming. It's the identification of the assets in your environment that is time consuming. Once you get tools deployed, things move quicker, right? In most cases, not all, but in most cases. So if you already have the tools deployed and you're really just modifying your rules, it's a pretty fast reaction. So you're limiting the blast radius, you're reducing all of that fun stuff, and really what that equates to at the end of the day is dollar savings, because you're reducing the disruption possibility, as well as if there is a disruption, you can stomp it out very rapidly. So with that being said, have you seen, Chris, over to you, have you seen cases where segmentation actually stopped an attack earlier than what it would have if it hadn't been in there?
Oh, very much so. I mean, we have cut the most common. I mean, most people don't want to admit it. We have blocked most. Let me get my words on this right. We
Okay.
have actually contained and isolated multiple customers during, and that's the always worst part when you're working with someone, or afterwards. Um, but usually, because it's just like, okay, well, anybody can claim that when they're a cybersecurity vendor. The main thing that customers come back to us about, and this is a great example, is when they start doing red team exercises or pen testing. So they have the same scenario coming through, and all of a sudden, since it's naturally hardened and contained and isolated, they have no more vulnerabilities. They have no more patching they have to deal with. It's contained and maintained. That you give them in that same scenario. It's just say, here's a domain admin, and here's your machine. Have at it. Like, see how far you can go. And they come back and they're like, well, we can do anything. So that's a very different conversation, and that's actually the most praise we usually hear, other than the people always not wanting to share their own incidents. We have been brought in. We don't provide IR. We work with partners just like yourself, but most of the time, it is on a perspective of, wow, we feel more secure because people validated we are more secure. And that's usually where we start getting more of the positive feedback as a product versus wow, you guys just blocked this attack. The beauty is it is contained. And there's so many different scenarios, so many different outages that keep happening across the world that you can see it. For example, if you hear a company has a complete shutdown for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months, they had a spread issue. I mean, that's not a single machine going down with ransomware. That means their whole entire internal communications got contained and controlled. So they had to do a full rebuild, or they had to decide to pay the ransom and then go through that recovery process itself. So just think of it that way. It's not new news. They just don't state it. We had a lateral movement issue. They say we had a breach and we were down for X amount of time. And your information is now out, and here's credit monitoring for you for the next year. So I think I've gotten at least 3 of those this year, which drives me crazy.
100%. I feel like I get another one in the mail every week at this point, to be
Freaking
honest.
ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Yes.
All right, so we're gonna skip to poll number 3. How long have you been working on microsegmentation? If you've been working on microsegmentation, I think there's an option for never started. So we're gonna go ahead and kick over to the next one while you guys fill that out. So again, I see some folks filling that out, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So getting started, really the key components here are, aligning to your business objectives. Chris, you actually said this really well earlier, making sure that you're focusing in on why are we doing this, what are the key components, and also identifying what are the most critical assets to your environment. If you do that work up front, the uptime and resilience portion to microsegmentation is going to be very well limited. Like we'll have a very good understanding of what we want to not disrupt as that's being rolled out, if that makes sense. And then also being upfront with yourself. What is your risk tolerance? Risk tolerance is, hey, some people we work with, for example, are like, I don't care, break everything. That's the best way to figure out who's using what or whether this is required or needed. Versus other organizations are like, please don't break this. Please don't break anything. My CEO will come yell at me, and I do not want to have a bad day today, right? So we need to make sure operations are up and functioning. So assessing visibility, identifying your high risk items, and all that fun stuff, that's kind of the key components there. So Chris, if someone's early in this journey, where do you think they should realistically start? What does that look like in your opinion?
I mean, the challenge when it comes to this journey is how do you allocate when it comes to your business needs? Like, does this come out of your networking? Does it come out of security? Like, where does this sit? Right. That's usually the first challenge. So most of the time, and most businesses are focusing on this new challenge of AI today and business continuity. That's the two, or business resilience. There's a few terms for it. So how do I keep my business up and running? Is the justification of understanding the justification as a business, why I should invest into this type of technology. That's what I would say is, how do you start this out? Like, why do we need this today? I understand as a security practitioner, this makes total sense. If you're a security guy, you're like, yeah, I understand. Like locking it down, isolating it per machine, microsegmentation, good thing. But when you start talking a business objective and you start talking to your leadership, they're like, well, we have firewalls, we pay a lot of money for that, and then we're paying for cloud. Like isn't that supposed to be secure by default? And you're like, no, it's not. And then you start breaking down a few of your products. They're like, I don't really understand the need for microsegmentation. So the 3 things on the left side right here is exactly what Corey's talking about: is uptime, resilience, and risk tolerance. So if you bring that up and say, as a company, hypothetically, we feel like we're very secure, but if somebody did spread across our company, how much would that take down our whole company? For how long? How far would they go? How much damage could they do? And is that worth my risk tolerance? So most companies would argue, no, it's not. What is an investment of hardening our company, adding small amount of friction when it comes to administrative actions, compared to potentially our whole business being down for 4 to 6 weeks at bare minimum, or paying who knows what millions of dollars for a ransomware that we couldn't afford in the first place. So that's why regulations are starting to focus on this as a product, by the way. HIPAA is the first one. For those who are maybe in the medical space, HIPAA's new regulations recently have just now pushing microsegmentation as part of the new HIPAA compliance, because they want to know what a user is doing, how it's actioned, and is it audited, and can you provide that scope and visibility? Because I have to, as a product, in order to do microsegmentation, know what you are doing, what you're talking to, what you're talking with, and that's all at your scale and visibility. So you look at it as an uplift of, now I know what's going on, I know what my users are doing, I know what my machines are communicating with, and it's isolated based on my business needs. And that provides more reassurance when it comes to business resilience. So I would argue don't look at it as this is an augmentation to networking. I would look at it as the left side. How do I keep my business up and running? And how do I prevent an attack from spreading and doing more damage? Hopefully, EDR and everything is doing that for me. But usually, if it passes your one machine, it's going to pass all the machines. So that's what I would argue right there. I've worked in the EDR space. They're top notch. The problem is most major events is not done through a malicious payload. It's me as a leaked credential, leak this, someone gain access, a phishing attempt. Like it's something that doesn't look bad. And that's why the EDR has this very firm wording of saying, well, if it looks real and smells real, we're assuming it's real. We'll block the malicious things. And then their ransomware warranties won't cover that because they're like, well, Corey was logged into that machine and Corey did what he was supposed to do. So the EDRs obviously it's not on us. No malicious payload occurred. So,
Absolutely
anyways,
agree.
go ahead, Corey. And I think there's a good question if you want to bring it up. You can Corey in the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll pop over to the Q&A actually. So if an attacker got in today, how far would they go? That's one question. Then I have a follow-up question, and then we'll wrap it up, Chris, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. I know we're at time. So, if that's the main thing, as I mentioned kind of earlier, the red teaming aspect, if you gave someone your domain controller credentials and you said how far can they go, usually that's the term that's like, well, hopefully they don't ever have that. The problem is, this is a public one. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. Uber had a head developer. They had right there, they kept getting prompts on multi-factor authentication to gain access into their machine. I was on the IR incident for that one. The guy just got tired of prompts, so he just said yes, like I don't care anymore. Like it's unfortunate, but after he gained access to that one machine, there was no friction after that. Boom, they gained access to everything. So in a true microsegmentation journey, he might have got initial access, and then it would have been like, well, wait a minute, why are you trying to gain access to this machine? You're not typically access there. So it would have created that friction, set off way other flags, and actually prevented the spread of misinformation or the wrong information out there. But the fact is that was years ago before AI was even popular. Now there's a new uptick. Like CrowdStrike just did an announcement last year based on their assessment. The quickest lateral movement they had was 27 seconds because of artificial intelligence. It only took an attacker 27 seconds to move laterally with AI. That is terrifying. And that's CrowdStrike. Yeah, that's CrowdStrike right there. So it's those kind of numbers right there that make you think maybe we do need to have some kind of measure of security that prevents a spread in my environment. Is it more policies? Well, that might create more business friction. So it kind of creates this challenge here. But is it more just isolation, knowing what's going on and making sure my business is running? So that's what I would say for you.
Absolutely. Last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. If someone does nothing and keeps their current architecture, what risk are they actually accepting?
You're accepting what I just mentioned, the capability of someone spreading through your environment if they get past all your security.
Yeah. Big, wide open interior. They call it the Uzi Center, right?
Yeah.
Just rip around. Okay. All right. Chris, I want to say thank you. It was great. Today I had a lot of fun. I hope you had a lot of fun. To our viewers, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and hanging in there with Chris and I. And keep on the lookout for the next webinar from us. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.